else but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. To die, to sleep perchance to dream, for in that sleep of death what dreams may come. But that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. The last, final frontier. Since early days, humankind is not only trying to find answers to the reason of its existence, but also to the unknown final frontier, life after death. Humankind cannot live forever, and when we die, what will we find beyond the grave? Stone Age people, ancient Egyptians, Greeks and Romans were fascinated by life after death. Philosophers, poets and playwrights have all expounded their theories. Artists give their own impression of life after death. In keeping with traditional views, John Milton's Paradise Lost and William Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell are two prominent literary classics that also influence society's attitudes and views regarding the afterlife. Arguably the most influential work, though, was Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, the three-part poetry epic which journeyed through Inferno, Purgatorio and Paradiso, or Hell, Purgatory and Heaven. Towards the end of the 20th century, a phenomenon arose in which people reported near-death experiences, otherwise known as NDEs, in which they encountered some form of afterlife reality. Modern medicine began referring to these occurrences as the Lazarus phenomenon, after the biblical character that was revived by Jesus 4 days after his supposed death. This phenomenon of NDEs, in which revised patients report an extension of consciousness beyond clinical death, has been documented for centuries.
Cool my tongue. I am in agony in this fire. Shafts of radiance came out from the central core. It was like a white fire. Phenomenal radiance in the central core. From that, I watched this brilliant light piercing out. And I thought even the stars in the universe, even the constellations must find their energy source from this focal point. What is that light? words appeared in front of my eyes. God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. I wonder if I could just see his face. I'll know who God is. As I got within a few feet of his presence, I began to place my face into the light.
And then, as I'm going down into this, I begin to look into the flames, and I begin to see people. I mean, there's thousands. There's too many. I don't know how many people are in the flames, and they're screaming, and their arms are flailing, and their bodies are rolling, and they're burning all over. They're burning like in liquid fire.
But what exactly is an NDE experience, medically speaking? As the name NDE implies, these people have some event in which they are severely physically compromised. Generally, there's a severe physical malady that occurs suddenly or at the end of a chronic illness. NDEs are often associated with cessation of heart function and cessation of breathing function, or very often both. As a consequence of that, within 10 seconds following cessation of heart function, blood stops flowing in the brain, and the EEG, which measures the electrical brain activity, goes flat, implying that there is no electrical activity in the brain. Given that when you stop breathing and your heart stops, and given that 10 seconds after that the EEG, the measure of electrical brain activity, goes absolutely flat, it's medically inexplicable that near-death experiencers are having a conscious experience. For years, however, some medical researchers had dismissed the NDE phenomenon as hallucinations caused by the dying body releasing a chemical cocktail as a means of defense against the pain and shock of impending death. That theory was dented in 1984 by an extraordinary medical emergency in the American West Coast city of Seattle. Maria, a migrant worker from Eastern Europe, was rushed to hospital after she collapsed at a friend's home. In the ICU, a medical team tried to stabilize her condition without success. Her heart stopped beating. Maria's body was lifeless for several minutes, but the doctors kept on trying to bring her back to life. Then they suddenly realized that the heart monitor showed some life. Maria was supposed to be dead. Maria came back to life and immediately told an amazing story. She saw everything while she left her body. She could see the medical team working on her. She then left the ICU to the roof of the hospital, and as she went up, saw a tennis shoe. No one believed her story, but her friends immediately ran up to the roof and with absolute shock found the tennis shoe exactly as described by Maria. Maria's experience could not be anything other than the absolute truth. If the out-of-body experience was purely a mental aberration, how could she have seen a physical reality that could later be verified? After Maria's revelation, other similar stories began to emerge of NDE patients undergoing out-of-body experiences and being able to relate verifiable details that they could not have imagined. Can we still say NDEs are hallucinations?
I think in terms of, yes, certainly in terms of the consistency of the testimonies in near-death experiences, it suggests that the experience is a reality which is not purely the product of brain chemicals, because, I mean, we know from studies of the effects of drugs ordinarily that if you give one person a drug and then give the same drug to another person, they'll have two completely different experiences. There might be broad similarities, but not the level of consistency you find with a near-death experience.
No, there's no person can dispute whether these experiences are the normal functioning of the brain at the point of death, or rather represent some sort of chaotic hallucinatory activity. Remember, hallucinations involve the perception of something that isn't real. So when we die, we're alert, we're conscious, we're aware of this reality, So certainly people having near-death experiences accurately describe what's happening in this reality. But the key element of the near-death experience is that we perceive, I say we, as all of us are going to have this experience, we perceive another reality superimposed over this one.
If NDEs are not hallucinations, is heaven and hellish experience reality?
I think in terms of whether the places visited in near-death experiences, either heavenly or in terms of a hellish type experience, are real, is something that's beyond proof. Ultimately, one would have to die in order to determine whether there was a genuine heaven or a genuine hell. But what's very clear from a psychological perspective is that the intensity of the experience is lived as real whilst the person's having it. So for these people, whether or not there really ends up actually being a heaven or a hell, they feel the experience is real for them at that moment in time. There's certainly no way we can deduce or prove that if someone sees an afterlife and it's heavenly, that heaven exists, because you'd have to die in order to really truly find that out.
When we die, we take that heaven and hell with us, and we fit where we belong. We die the life we live. Near-death experiences don't make a sinner into a saint, necessarily, but doesn't change much, but you become more aware. And a serial killer, when they die, would become more aware of how much of us, and punishment they inflicted on others. Yeah. And that's that condition. Yeah.
The question then arises, can there then be such a thing as an objective heaven or hell? Or are these places merely the product of religious superstition? Is there actual scientific evidence to support their existence? Today's scholars and religious figures are certainly divided. Some talk of reincarnation, others of assimilation into the universal life force. Nobody knows for sure.
I'm a pastor.
Or do they?
I stole money from the church and I lied. Help me.
Different cultures and religions experience NDEs differently. Even people of the same religion interpret NDEs differently. The question is, do the Muslim or Christian heaven and hell, for example, appear differently when experiencing an NDE? Reports of these so-called hellish or negative near-death experiences that closely resemble biblical imagery have sparked global interest in the ongoing debate to such an extent that research is currently being conducted by both the academic and scientific mainstream. Certainly the debate has been going on for centuries. Some claim hell is a human invention. Today, it's not just the scientific community that is evaluating the preconceptions of a heaven and hell, but also religious institutions. Some churches even go so far as to say that there isn't a hell, and question whether these archaic beliefs are still valid in the 21st century. But how do these hellish experiences appear?
When we die, we go through a fairly rigorous series of events. And a picture that a child drew of nearly drowning, I think, illustrates this better than anything else. And we can see in this picture, the first thing he draws when he nearly drowned is he states that hands reached inside his body and pulled him out. Doesn't identify who these hands belong to. But then these hands plunged him into darkness.
As I'm standing there, I become acutely aware that the darkness isn't just physical, but there is a spiritual component to it. An evil, cold, encroaching. It's like the atmosphere is permeated with a cold sensation, a chill or a terror.
Visible eyes of something or someone checking me out. The darkness had it in the atmosphere.
Where am I?
Shut up. You deserve to be. You deserve to be.
deserve to be where?
Hell, now shut up.
As I stood there, realizing I could actually be in hell.
And then I felt my body begin to move. I was strapped to a gurney, but it was like my body began to float. And I'm floating through this smoke. And I'm going faster and faster. And I can't understand what's going on. And I begin to hear voices all around in the smoke. And the voices are crying. The voices are screaming. And there's all kinds of groaning. And then it's like I'm coming out of this smoke, like I'm coming out of a tunnel. And I'm looking down into what appeared to be the open mouth of a volcanic crater, like a burning lake. And I'm falling into this. I'm just going down into this, and I have no control. And the smell is awful, and I can't breathe, and my ears are full of these screams. And then, as I'm going down into this, I begin to look into the flames, and I begin to see people. I mean, there's thousands. There's too many. I don't know how many people are in the flames. And they're screaming, and their arms are flailing, and their bodies are rolling, and they're burning all over. They're burning like in liquid fire. But they're not burning up. They're just burning. And like a close-up lens on a camera, some of those faces loomed up in front of me. Their faces are screaming, contorted, and they're calling my name. Ronnie, Ronnie, don't come here. There's no escape.
Hell seems to be a terrible place. Nothing that we will encounter in this world. But what do researchers say? Dr. Tony Lawrence from the University of Coventry.
From my position in terms of transpersonal psychology, the psychology of spirituality, which would deal directly with notions of evil and of good, and of hell and of heaven, my perspective on what hell would be is that hell is not a place that you go to as such. Hell is more a condition or state of mind that a person has when they're ignorant of the possibilities in their life, the possibilities for love and joy and happiness, and of leading a meaningful life, so that in fact anyone at any one moment in time, by virtue of just being ignorant of their circumstances and of themselves and their place in the world, would literally be in hell. But it's not a place that you can go to, it's a state of being, for me personally. Yeah.
We don't know what happens after we die. For sure, there's no objectively, hell isn't a planet on the other side of Jupiter that we haven't discovered yet. This is clearly a mental phenomena that happens to us when we die. It's real. The calculus is real. Mathematics is real. Love is real. So these experiences are real experiences, but they're dynamic experiences. They happen to us when we die. So I think the best way to understand the hellish experience is that we pass through hell as part of the dying process, if that hell is based on what our lives were like. If we're isolated, if we're alone, if we harm others, if we have religious belief systems which incorporate an objectively real hell, if we're afraid of the dark and we don't understand that darkness is part of the dying experience. All of those things woven together, or any of them individually, will then contribute to having a hellish near-death experience.
Is the experience then purely subjective? Some experts believe not. Dr. Richard Kent, a retired medical doctor, has traveled the world studying the NDE phenomenon over many years and has written several books on the subject. Of the 300 case studies he has made, an alarming amount report not only the existence of a heavenly afterlife reality, but also a hellish one.
A place called hell. And they describe it's an absolutely terrible and awful place. Now, I don't know what it's like in South Africa, but in England, many churches don't talk about hell very much. I don't know why. Jesus spoke about hell a great deal. He said it's a place to be avoided. Anyway, they describe hell as somewhat as dark and oppressive. They also were told in the scriptures where it is. It's in the center of the earth. Now people say, well, where do you get that from? Well, it's in the scriptures. Matthew 12 is verses 40 and 41, I believe. Jesus says, I'll give you the sign of Jonah. Just as Jonah was in the belly of a great fish for 3 days and for 3 nights, so shall the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and for 3 nights. Now Jesus talked about hell, or the place of the departed spirits at the time of Jesus, being in the heart of the earth. All right? So it's somewhere in the heart of this planet, I believe. Now, for example, in the Old Testament, the spirit of Samuel came up from Sheol, the Old Testament hell, and the sons of Korah went down to Sheol, the Old Testament hell. We're told in the book of Ephesians that one day every knee will bow, those above the earth, those on the earth, and those under the earth. So I believe it's somewhere down there. Now, they describe it as very hot, it's very unpleasant. There are demons there who are tormenting the people who go there. It says in the scriptures that Lazarus was in torment. It's just a horrendous, awful place. It's a place where people are terrified, are frightened, and people even just who've seen hell, even years later, they recoil in horror at what they saw there. Just a place of awfulness. People have seen Satan there. People have actually had conversations with Satan. People have had conversations with demons there. People have heard the demons swear. They said they never heard language such as they heard in hell. They had all the swear words that are commonly used and more.
Was assigned to an assembly belt under penalty of judgment by some helper, evil over here, if he didn't complete placing these giant multicolored puzzles, like a jigsaw puzzle that was coming by, one piece to the next. If he didn't get it on time, he was under penalty. And he was screaming, I'm in hell. Where's the hell? To him, that was hell. He never wants that again. Never. He converted his whole life. Converted his wife, too, who he woke in that hospital in Knoxville with his head in her lap in the hospital bed. It was a very touching story, and it's life-changing. Everything is so violently life-changing, so peacefully life-changing, so wonderful. So you're onto a subject that is important to every individual present. Is it safe to die? Do I know where I'm going before I get there? That's the question.
And what of heaven? Is it the blinding white light, the benevolent presence of a supreme being, the wondrous feeling of love and peace that we've always imagined it to be? Some NDE survivors also got to glimpse heaven and found it just as real and tangible as hell had been.
As I was drawn into the opening, I could now see that it was a tunnel. As I looked along the length of it, I could see the source of the radiance. My first thought is the center of the universe. Look at the light. Look at the power coming from there. As I've been moved towards it, I watch as a wave of radiance comes up. As this wave of light comes off the source, it touches me, and I feel warmth, comfort. All that kind of fear and darkness just seems to go out of me, and I feel a living light flow through me. Shafts of radiance came out from the central core. It was like a white fire. Phenomenal radiance in the central core. From that, I watched this brilliant light piercing out, and I thought even the stars in the universe, even the constellations must find their energy source from this focal point. What is that light? Is there someone in there surrounded by this radiance? As I questioned that in my own mind, a voice spoke to me from the center of the light.
Right, for sure. Well, first of all, their spirit leaves their bodies, and then not always, but very commonly, they meet Jesus Christ. They describe him as nearly 6 foot tall, but radiating light, tremendous amount of light coming from him, from his face and from his chest and from his arms and from his legs. Many people describe he's still dressed in the clothes appropriate to a Jewish rabbi. Of course, Jesus was a Jewish rabbi, and he has a golden sash around his waist. Many people, as they come close to, in their minds come these words, "You're in the presence of the Son of God." And at that point, many people get down and start to worship Jesus Christ. And at that point, they realize he's still got holes in his hands and in his feet, because they're quite close to his feet by then. And they realize that those crucifixion holes are still there. But people, it isn't just the appearance of Jesus, it's the fact that they feel in the presence of so much love. Many people said they've never felt like that. They've never felt so completely surrounded by love, powerful as that. It's just incredible love. I mean, for example, some of the people I've interviewed have been hardened Second World War soldiers. I mean, these are, tough guys. And they started to cry as they described coming to the presence of Jesus. Amazing, really. Mm. And then, of course, after that, people either go to heaven, not invariably, but many, either go to heaven or go to hell. Now, let's talk about the nice place. In heaven, first of all, they find themselves in their spirit bodies. They're looking down and they're looking at bright white hands and bright white feet. In fact, the whole body is bright and light and white. They're different bodies. They feel young, they feel rejuvenated, they feel fully in control of all their senses. And yet, for example, Dr. Eby, he described, he said that his sort of reasoning power was greatly increased. His thought processes were much more powerful. He could see much further. He could hear much more. His hearing was much more powerful. His whole body was just a much better upgrade model, if you like. But then what do they see? Well, first of all, they often describe walking either on streets of transparent gold, as it says in Revelation 21, or walking in fields of flowers, but these flowers are radiating light. Light comes from the trees and the flowers and the grass. And there's not only light coming from the trees and the flowers and the grass, but music as well. And here's an amazing thing. Many people have said, Richard, it's an extraordinary thing, but you can see music in heaven. Now, I can't explain that. I just can't explain that, but they say you can see the music in heaven. And then they say there's no sun there, but light just comes from the trees and the flowers and the grass. People have seen the river of life. Some people have seen the throne of God, that's God the Father, which is very big actually. It's many people said it's up to 3 stories high. And there's a rainbow over the throne, just like it says in the scriptures. Many people have seen this great lake in front of the throne, and people have seen crowds and crowds of people around the throne of God, all praising God. And remember, you can see the music. Now, people have been transported around different parts of heaven. We tend to think of heaven as a place. It's a huge place. It's huge. It's massive. It's outside time, which is difficult for us to comprehend. But another thing is people can travel to different parts of heaven instantaneously. People have looked up to mountains and said, I'd like to be there, and they would instantly be there. People have met their angels, their personal angels. Psalm 91 says we have our own personal angels, and many people have seen their own personal angels. It's amazing. It's absolutely, and one woman I'm thinking of met her own child in heaven. This little girl, she was only 10, she was killed by a truck or a lorry. This was in the States, and when she got to heaven, there's this little child playing in a beautiful garden. And she was ecstatically happy, playing with a lot of other children as well. And in fact, this particular lady said to the little girl, wouldn't you like to come back to Earth? And she said, well, Jesus said I could. But actually, it was such fun here, I decided to stay here. So there we are. So that's heaven. Heaven is just dramatic. In fact, you can always tell when people have been to heaven because they're just yearning to go back. Most of the people who I've met who've really seen heaven just wanted to be there.
It is clear that adults who experience NDEs are influenced by their religious and cultural value system. But what about those who are not yet influenced by culture or religion? Young children. Will they give us a better view on NDE?
So it's then a matter of religious belief systems as to whether you think that other reality is real or not. So that's the issue of religion and philosophy. But nevertheless, when I say near-death experiences are real, I mean that they occur when these children say that they're happening.